The night my own child told me I was a burden, the moon looked like a coin the city had already spent. By dawn, I had nothing but 2 suitcases, a backbone I hadn't used in years, and a promise to myself. If they thought I was done, they hadn't seen me breathe. I'd spent 43 years building a life in Atlanta, a brick bungalow with a front porch deep enough for summers and secrets. On a Tuesday that smelled like wet asphalt and magnolia, my daughter, Camille, stood in the foyer in her camel coat, the good pearls resting like punctuation at her throat, and said, "Mom, this isn't safe for you anymore. Stairs, maintenance, the garden. You need somewhere appropriate." Appropriate. The word slid across the floor and tripped me. Her husband, Mark, was behind her with the stance of a man who had practiced agreeing. His hand rested on the banister I had sanded myself in 1992, the summer the AC gave out. He offered a pamphlet like it was a bouquet. Peachtree Pines Senior Living. Smiling in that patient way men learn when they think patience is the same as kindness. I don't remember packing, only the sudden smallness of my life. 2 suitcases, photographs from the beach at Tybee when Camille was 8 and furious about jellyfish, the teapot my mother carried from Mobile in a box of towels, the scent of lemon oil in the empty halls, the bed where my husband, Peter, slept last, unmade like a ship gone out. When we reached the motel off Buford Highway, the clerk avoided my eyes. Camille pressed 4 folded 20s into my hand like a tip, like a hush. "Just until we get your finances sorted," she said. "Mark will handle everything." That night, I lay on a mattress that remembered every back it had met. I stared at the popcorn ceiling and thought about the will Peter had shown me once at the kitchen table after we'd paid off the second mortgage. I remembered the way he'd tapped the page and said, "You'll be okay, June, I made sure." The next morning, I took a bus downtown to an office with glass walls and too much winter light. It smelled like citrus and ink. Harold Green had been our attorney for 15 years, and his face dropped when he saw me. "June," he said, standing, his gray tie crooked in a way that felt human. "I tried calling. Camille told me you were traveling." "Traveling," I repeated, and my voice did not break. "Harold, I need to see Peter's will." We sat at a conference table the color of fresh coffee. He pulled a file like a magician producing a dove. The paper, the real paper, not whatever Camille had waved in my kitchen, was crisp. Harold read aloud as though my life depended on each syllable. And in that moment, it did. "To my wife, June Ellison, I leave our home at 819 Ansley Place, all contents therein, and 75% of all financial assets and accounts to be placed under her sole control. To my daughter, Camille Ellison Foster, I leave 25% to be held in trust until her 45th birthday, contingent on her respectful care of her mother following my death." The lines on the page might as well have been light. I let out a sound that made Harold stop speaking. It was a laugh and a sob and a vow. The old June, the June who ironed Peter's shirts every Sunday night and let Camille talk over her at Thanksgiving, would have forgiven, negotiated, made tea. The woman in the glass wall stared back at me in the reflection, and she was a storm. "Camille showed me a different will," I said. "She told me she inherited everything. She told me to find somewhere else to go." Harold's mouth tightened. "That's fraud and elder abuse. June, I'm so sorry. I thought about Camille's pearls, the way Mark had set his hand on my banister like he owned it." In my mind, I rearranged a chessboard I'd never learned to play, But instinct knows more than books. People had treated me like a pawn my entire life. The thing about pawns, if they keep moving, they change shape. Harold called an APD detective, Priya Shah, who spoke like a violin bow, clean, precise, no wasted motion. "We'll freeze anything we need to freeze," she said, already dialing. "You won't be alone in this." By mid-afternoon, the banks had flagged the accounts. The utilities transfer sat in limbo. A private investigator, a woman named Devon Blake with braid-tight focus, met us in Harold's office and slid a forged will across the table. "Pretty," she said, "but wrong." 22 minutes later, she had an invoice from a boutique print shop in Buckhead that had no business producing legal documents. My phone rang at 3:41. Camille. I let it ring once more, then was polite and pressed the green circle. "Mom?" Her voice contained the not-quite apology she'd used since 3rd grade. "There's some kind of glitch at the bank. Mark thinks—" "I'm with Harold," I said, gentle as winter. "We're looking at the will your father actually signed." Silence. Then, "Mom, you're grieving. People are taking advantage." "Camille," I said, and all at once my voice was steel. "Your father didn't leave you my house. He didn't leave you my life. He left you a test. You failed it. What I didn't say, you failed me. I would save that blade for later." By evening, Detective Shah had a warrant. Mark and Camille were eating at a midtown place with menus that tried too hard when APD walked them out past the Orchid arrangements. The news wouldn't know the names yet, but the dining room would, and that was its own kind of justice. I slept back in my house that night, the air smelling like sawdust and the ghost of Peter's aftershave. Camille had already moved a box of sweaters into my closet. I packed them into contractor bags and set them on the porch like offerings. I stood in the doorway a long time after that, the city moving in the distance like a promise I hadn't believed in for too long. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, a siren stitched the darkness. In my kitchen, the clock I'd bought at a yard sale in '87 clicked off a minute, then another. And for the first time since the funeral, I remembered how to breathe without counting. If you've made it this far with me, thank you. I'm talking from Atlanta, where the cicadas sing even in my memory. Tell me where you're listening from, if you feel like it. And if this story lands somewhere in you, press like, subscribe, and stay. I'm not done. The morning after the arrest, I made coffee in a kitchen that had never tasted like mine. The cream curdled. I threw it out and poured another, as if second tries always go smoother. Harold came by with bagels and paperwork and eyes that had slept in a chair. "They'll arraign this afternoon," he said, passing me sesame and a pen. Detective Shah got copies of everything the print shop produced. The forgery is not amateur. I thought of Mark's confidence, the way he'd chosen seats in restaurants with a view. Confidence isn't competence, but it's a good mask. Before noon, the electricity blinked. The utility company caught between names. I stood with my palm on the wall, feeling the house hum. "You're mine," I said, as if walls listen. Maybe they do. Maybe they've always been the best kind of confidant. Quiet, steady, remembering everything and telling nothing. The phone lit up with unknown numbers. A producer from WSB wanted a sensitive feature on elder financial abuse. A reporter from the AJC promised full control. No one has that, not really. I said no for now. Some stories need to set before you slice them. Devon arrived in denim and a blazer that meant business. She set up a mobile scanner in Peter's old study and began cataloging. "Your husband was meticulous," she said, "reverent the way some people are in churches, hanging files labeled in his neat hand, spiral notebooks with dates and acronyms, a ledger that didn't belong to any decade I'd lived through." "Peter loved a system," I said. "He believed order was a kind of kindness." "He also believed in backups," she added, pulling a small fireproof safe from behind a shelf. Inside, the original will, a letter with my name on it, a flash drive the color of a bruise. I didn't open the letter yet. Some words, once released, changed the weather. The bail hearing came and went the way legal storms do, quickly, expensively, with precise devastation. Mark's mother, Patricia, put up property in Johns Creek for his bond. Camille's friend from the junior league posted hers. They walked out in their best neutral colors. They had to pass a wall of lenses. Camille blinked into the shutters like a child underwater. That evening, she stood on my porch. Without makeup, she looked like her 8-year-old self again, furious about jellyfish. "Mom," she said, and her voice rasped, "please, let me in." I held the door, not wide and not closed. "Say what you need." Her eyes searched the house like she could reclaim it with her gaze. "I panicked," she said. "After Dad, after Peter, there was so much paperwork. Mark said he'd help. He's good at this. I thought—" "You thought I was in your way," I said. "You thought my grief was an opportunity." She flinched. "I thought you'd waste it." There it was, the small, mean truth she'd been feeding for years. "My waste," I said, "isn't your inheritance." I stepped outside and pulled the door behind me. The air was damp, the sky a bruise healing. "Camille, your father loved you so much he built a test into the one thing that could have ruined you. He gave you a chance to be decent. You chose easy." Her eyes glistened. "You've always thought I was cruel." "No," I said. "I've thought you were scared. Cruelty was the way you kept fear fed." She made a sound that wasn't quite crying. "What happens now?" "Now?" I said. "We do this in the open, with consequences." She stared at the azaleas like they could answer. "I never thought you'd fight me," she whispered. That was the most honest thing she'd said in months. "Me neither," I said. After she left, I finally opened Peter's letter at the kitchen table where we raised our daughter and a mortgage. His handwriting was steady, the kind you learn in Catholic school and never shake. "June," it began, and already I was crying. Not because of what he said, but because he had written it to begin with. He wrote about worry and love, about watching me disappear into service and wanting to pry me back into my own life. He wrote about Camille, astute words, not unkind, about her hunger and the way it would devour her if no one taught her to share. He wrote about the will like a life raft he'd built with his bare hands. And at the end, a line that hooked into me and stayed. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to stand beside you when you needed a witness. Be your own witness, June. Say the truth out loud. That's the only thing that beats a lie." My hands shook. Truth has a way of rattling what holds you up, then rebuilding it better. Devon's scan finished with a chime. "There's something you need to see," she said, and slid a printout toward me. A transfer authorization, recent, authorizing a move from an account I didn't know existed to one I did, with Mark's signature as advisor. "Found it on the print shop server," she added. "They scanned everything they forged. People who fake things often keep trophies." Detective Shah texted an hour later. "We have enough. Sleep at home tonight." I did. In my bed, in my house, with the letter under my pillow like a charm. The morning news said, "Local investment advisor," as if those 3 words were a shrug. They showed Mark's headshot in grayscale. It made him look like a victim of photography, not choices. Camille's name did not appear. Her picture lived on my phone as a toddler in a paper crown she wouldn't share. Harold called with a voice like gravel. Foster's counsel reached out. They want to discuss a resolution. Resolution means cut your losses and call it mercy. It's the sort of word people use when they want to wrap a bruise in silk. "Tell them we're not in the market for euphemisms," I said. The first contractor arrived to give me a quote on sanding the floors. He wore boot covers, called me ma'am, and told me the heart pine was good enough to survive anything. I took that as a benediction. In Peter's study, Devon and I began excavating his drives. She built timelines with dates and wire transfers and acronyms I learned like a second language. The story that emerged was not a slow leak. It was a carefully managed river. Money moved, but always with purpose. Clients with ordinary names paid consulting fees that smelled wrong once you learned how to use your nose. "Devon," I said, my mouth dry. "What am I looking at?" "Possibilities," she said. "And problems, maybe both." That afternoon, WSB left me a voicemail I listened to twice. "Miss Ellison, we'd love to produce a segment that empowers seniors. This is your story, told your way." My way is a phrase that tastes good the first time and then turns chalky. I filed it under later. Camille texted from an unknown number. Her old one, apparently, was compromised, as if a phone can be unfaithful. "Mom, can we talk without the lawyers?" I didn't reply. If someone has shown you they will use silence against you, don't offer them a roomful of it. Mark, however, did not wait for invitation. He called with a friendliness he wore like cologne. "June, we can fix this." "Can we?" I said, stirring a pot of collards. I cooked like a woman who planned to feed the future. "We can," he said. "This is a misunderstanding. Everyone's emotions are—" "Mark," I said, and turned off the stove. "Did you sign anything with my name on it?" A pause. Then, "I authorized necessary transfers to protect the estate." "From whom?" I asked. "From me?" "You don't know this world," he said, and there it was, polished and patient, the assumption that my ignorance was a fact, not a story told about me. "You've never handled money." "I handled a marriage," I said, "one of the most expensive things on earth." The doorbell rang at 7. I checked the peephole and found a woman in red lipstick and a sheath dress that cost more than my first car. Patricia Foster smiled with all her teeth. "June," she said, rolling my name like dough. "We're both mothers. Let's talk." I let her in because I wanted to see what kind of mother makes a son like Mark. She sat without being asked. "My son acted in haste," she began, the way people begin when they don't intend to end in truth. "Camille is vulnerable. Her father just died. You can understand how—" "Your son forged my husband's signature," I said. "My daughter told me to get out of my own house." Patricia tilted her head like I was cute. "You and I both know Camille was always intense. Money is security, and some girls never learn how to feel safe." "She learned from someone," I said. Patricia's smile thinned. "We can make this go away. We are prepared to compensate you for your distress." "Compensate," I repeated, as if the syllables could reveal what they hid. She named a number that would have solved any problem I had before the problem became the point. And then she named a larger one. And then she showed me the only card that mattered, a folder of photocopies. "Your husband's business," she said. "Alan was not the saint you recall." "Peter," I said. "His name was Peter." "Peter," she corrected smoothly. "He entertained clients who do not like federal attention. It would be a shame if that attention were to land where your name is on the deed." Fear is a blunt instrument. It's also precise if you've spent your life being told you're fragile. My fingers went cold. My heart learned a new knock. "Get out," I said. "Now." After the door closed on her perfume, I called Devon and put the folder under her lamp. She went quiet the way people do when a story is about to turn. "June," she said carefully, "this is bigger than Mark, bigger than Camille. We need to talk to the feds." "Do it," I said. "I'm tired of men with folders telling me what's mine." I made a pie that night, pecan the way Peter liked before his cardiologist said no, and I ate a slice standing at the island like a woman who knew she'd need strength for what came next. Devon knew an assistant U.S. attorney who knew a woman at the bureau who owed her a favor. That's how these things begin, not with a knock, but with a network. Agent Mariah Klein met us in a room that pretended not to be an interrogation space. She had a face built for poker and a voice built for lullabies. "Miss Ellison," she said, offering water, "I'm sorry for your loss and for this additional mess." "We brought files," Devon said, "and a question. How much of this do you already know?" Mariah sat with the pages a long time. She made notes without looking like she was writing. "Your husband," she said finally, and let the sentence hang. "He was efficient." "Efficient," I repeated, my mouth sand. "We've had his name on various peripheries," she said. "Nothing directly actionable. Your son-in-law, though, is a frequent flyer in a different drawer." I almost laughed. Of course he was. "What I don't understand," I said, "is why Patricia thought waving these pages at me would help. If the house is tainted, if everything is, then I lose either way." "Unless," Mariah said, "you jump first." There it was, the difference between falling and diving. Choice. "Let me ask you something else," she added. "Would you be willing to record a conversation with your daughter and her husband?" My heart did that new knock. "Why?" "Because," she said, "I suspect Mark is involved in more than forged signatures. I suspect he thinks your late husband's files are currency. I suspect he'll try to spend them." I breathed out. "Tell me how to help you stop him." She explained the wire. She explained the legalities. She explained the risk in a tone so even it made me feel brave. "You don't have to," she said finally, and met my eyes so I could see she meant it. "I have to," I said. Back home, the house felt like a bird learning a new song. I moved through it with care, touching wood, glass, iron. I opened the letter Peter had written again and traced the last line. "Be your own witness. Say the truth out loud." Mark called at 8 with the sound of a man sure of his own handsomeness. "June, let's end this." "Tomorrow," I said. 8 p.m., my house. He liked that. Home turf that he thought was his. "We'll bring papers," he said, "so we can sign and move on." After I hung up, I made tea and called Camille. She didn't answer. I wrote her a message that said only, "Tomorrow. Come with your husband. Bring your honesty if you can find it." I slept light and woke before the birds. I stood in the doorway of the study and let dawn paint the edges of Peter's desk. The room felt like a boat at anchor, waiting for a tide. In that pale light, it occurred to me that I had never driven a plane in my marriage. I had suggested, supported, soothed. I had never said, "We go this way." I said it now. That evening, Agent Klein fitted me with a recorder. The weight of it was less than a necklace and more than a promise. "If you feel unsafe," she said, "we're in the van. Knock on your kitchen counter twice. We'll come in." Devon sat in the dining room, on call like a guardian you hire because you finally believe you deserve one. Harold waited with a motion he could file in his sleep. At 7:59, Mark's Mercedes purred to a stop. At 8:08, the bell rang. Camille stood half a step behind him, eyes glittering with the stubbornness that had survived braces, piano lessons, and motherhood. I opened the door and, with it, a chapter I hadn't intended to write and now needed more than air. We sat at my kitchen table beneath the fixture Peter and I picked at a warehouse sale, the one I said looked like a comet if comets were made of amber. Mark opened a leather folder and arranged pages like tarot on oak. "Here's how this can work," he said. "You keep the house, a stipend. We all sign non-disclosures. No one needs to know." Camille watched me the way I used to watch her taste a new food, ready to interpret, to explain, to coax the swallow. "Mom," she said, "this is fair." "A fair," I repeated, "like a coin with two heads." I touched the nearest paper. The language was thick with kindness that cut. "What about the will?" I asked. "The one your father signed, the one I read yesterday with his attorney." Camille looked at Mark. Mark didn't blink. "That's the thing," he said smoothly. "There are, unfortunately, issues with some of the funds behind that will. Legally, it's complicated. We can't, in good conscience, expose you to that." In good conscience," I said, "because repeating words is how you make them answer to what they claim." "What issues?" I asked. Mark leaned back like a man in a chair he'd earned. "Your husband was not who you thought he was. He made money in ways that attract attention." "He made money building an IT consulting company," I said. "I filed the tax returns and made his lunches." "And," Mark added, smiling like a cat with cream, "he moved certain clients' capital through structures that aren't, how shall I put it, Sunday school." Camille flinched. It was small, but it was there. She hadn't known this part until recently, and it had carved something out of her. "So we take your offer," I said, "and the problem goes away." "The problem becomes someone else's," he said, and when I looked up at him, I knew the recorder was catching the most honest sentence of the night. I put my palm on the counter and knocked twice. Agent Klein entered with two others, soft-footed as cats, badges out like rain. Mark's face went through all 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, shock, and a 6th I'd never seen: embarrassment. Camille made a sound that wasn't my daughter's, and I'll hear it forever. "Mr. Foster," Mariah said, "why don't we stop pretending this is a family mediation?" Mark reached for his phone. An agent took it like a toy. Camille reached for me and stopped, her hand hovering in air that had no mercy left. "Mom," she said, "please." "Please what?" I asked. "Please remember the girl who cried when the jellyfish stung. Please remember your piano recital and the time you broke your wrist and we drew smiley faces on your cast." "I remember all of that. I also remember Tuesday." They read rights in voices that never wavered. They placed cuffs like gentle bracelets. The agents led Mark through my hallway, where our growth chart in pencil still marked Camille's height at 12, 5 foot even, stubborn as a fence post. Camille turned at the threshold. "You've ruined us," she whispered. "No," I said. "You did, I just stopped helping." After they left, I stood at the sink with the window open to a night that felt new in the way cities do after rain. Devon stepped close, placed a hand on my shoulder the way women do when we remember we are each other's spine. "Good woman," she said softly. Agent Klein lingered. "There's more we need to talk about," she said, "but not tonight. Eat something, sleep. Tomorrow we start digging deeper into your husband's files." "Deeper?" I asked, my mouth already tired of the taste of fear. She nodded. "You deserve the truth, all of it." When the house was quiet, I took the letter from under my pillow again and read it with a mouthful of pecan. Peter had always loved sugar. He would have loved this moment if he'd lived to see me claim it. Me, who once apologized for breathing too loud. Morning came with birds that didn't care whose names were on the docket. Agent Klein spread Peter's files across my dining table like maps to a country I hadn't known I'd lived in. Devon annotated with small, neat stars. Harold drank coffee so black it felt like a dare. "What am I looking at?" I asked again, not for lack of explanation, but because sometimes questions remake you. "2 stories," Mariah said. "One is a legitimate consulting practice. He built it, sold it, bought it back, grew it again. The other runs parallel. Shell entities, short-term LLCs, consultancy invoices for network architecture assessments that correspond to transfers from clients who like privacy." "Criminals," I said. "Some," she said. "Some are just rich men with delicate reputations. Some are both." "What does that make Peter?" I asked, and braced. "A man who was very good at not being caught," Mariah said gently. I thought of the way he sorted screws in the garage, coffee cans labeled with Sharpie. I thought of the steady faith with which he trimmed our boxwoods. I thought of how he had taught Camille to ride a bike. "Keep your eyes ahead, baby. Keep your chest open. I'm here." Devon slid a drive across to Mariah. "Pulled from a hidden partition," she said. "Encrypted. He used a passphrase, but I think we have it." "Do we?" I asked. Devon smiled. "Just your anniversary, spelled wrong the way Peter always spelled it on purpose because he said it made it ours." I laughed. Then I cried. Then I laughed again, because grief is a braid. Before lunch, Patricia called from a number I didn't recognize. "You don't want this," she said without greetings. "Whatever this is, you don't want it." "What I want," I said, "isn't on your menu. You think the government will take your side because you're a widow with a tidy kitchen? They'll take all of it." "Then they'll have it," I said. The sentence surprised us both with how it sounded said out loud. After we hung up, Mariah looked at me long. "If we discover proof of financial crimes, we may seize. I won't lie." "Tell me the truth," I said, "and let me choose it." In the afternoon, the flash drive opened like a bloom. Emails, spreadsheets, a folder labeled simply "Insurance." Inside, logs of conversations, names I recognized from the Atlanta Business Chronicle, names I didn't, which I would learn belonged to men who paid for quiet, receipts of donations to charities that were not charities, and voice notes, one labeled, "If June needs it." My hand hovered. Then I clicked. Peter's voice filled the room, the soft drawl of a man who had never raised his voice to win an argument because he knew patience was a louder weapon. June, he said, if Mariah Klein is in the room, then I did my job. We all looked at Mariah because there is a moment in every story where coincidence gives you a kiss on the mouth and you have to decide if you'll kiss back. Peter continued, I've been cooperating. I'm not proud of how it started, but I am proud of where it led. If you're hearing this, tell them to look at the Trillium accounts and the donor-advised funds with Azalea in the name. And June, don't let Camille make you small. Not ever again. Silence can be church. We sat in it a while. Mariah exhaled. Well, she said, that changes the weather. How? I asked, my chest opening like I was back on a bicycle with a father's hand on the seat. If he was a cooperating source, she said carefully, and if he was allowed to maintain certain accounts to preserve his cover, then not every dollar is dirty. Some are complicatedly clean. Complicatedly clean, I murmured, like a man who learned to spell anniversary wrong on purpose. We worked until dusk turned the dining room windows to mirrors. I looked up and saw a woman I knew and didn't. She looked like me and also like my mother the day she took my father's tobacco pouch and threw it in the river. I had always thought that day was about cigarettes. It wasn't. It was about breath. The investigation bloomed like kudzu, fast, green, relentless. Mariah's team executed warrants I only read about later, names trending in corners of the internet where reputations go to change clothes. Trillium accounts untangled into donor funds that fed both soup kitchens and shell companies. Azalea names led to floors in glass towers where men courted tax deductions like debutantes. In the middle of it, I took a walk. Atlanta in late spring smells like honeysuckle and hot breaks. I walked to the beltline where runners counted steps they believed would save them. I watched a girl teach a smaller girl to skate. Chest up, she said, eyes ahead. I wanted to tell her I knew something about that. Back home, I sanded a corner of the dining room floor as if doing so could erase what had happened there and also sanctify it. The heart pine gleamed like a promise. It would keep showing up if I did. Camille's lawyer requested a meeting. Harold and I obliged, in a conference room with a wall-sized photograph of Midtown at night. Her attorney was young and earnest and already exhausted by the way the world bends. Camille sat in a navy dress with sleeves, her hair in a knot I used to make for her when she was late. Miss Ellison, the lawyer began, my client wants to apologize. I turned to her. She opened her mouth and the right words did not come, not because she didn't know them, but because she wanted them to work like keys they were not. I'm sorry, she said. I panicked. I thought, I know what you thought, I said. You thought I was small. You thought you were big. You thought love meant yes. I leaned in. It doesn't. Her eyes shone. What can I do? She asked. Serve your sentence, I said. Tell the truth. Learn how to live without taking. And after? She asked, a small voice trying to be the ocean. After is after, I said. Don't live in it now. On the way out, she touched my sleeve. Mom, she whispered, do you still love me? I closed my eyes. Love is not always a feeling. Sometimes it's a weather system. Sometimes it's an old house you keep paying taxes on because it was your grandmother's. Sometimes it's a river you step out of so you don't drown. I do, I said, but love isn't a vote. That night, I opened Peter's voice note again. This time I caught a sound at the end, a small exhale I'd missed before. He'd been scared when he recorded it. I loved him anew for that. The courage of a man who finally understood fear wasn't proof you were wrong, just proof you were awake. Mariah called at 9. "We've confirmed cooperation," she said, relief braided through her discipline. "A lot of what he controlled was monitored. You won't lose everything." "What will I lose?" I asked, preparing my ribs. "Some of it," she said. "Maybe more than you want, but not more than you can bear." I took a deep breath and felt my mother's river in my mouth. "Then we choose daylight," I said. "Daylight it is," she said. The house changed. Not in bones, those stayed steady, but in language. I painted the study a color called harbor because names matter. I turned Peter's desk so it faced the window and bought brushes that felt good in my hand. The first thing I painted was a bowl of pears that looked like moons learning each other's curves. A woman from a non-profit came to see me about a project. Senior's Bill of Rights for Finances. We sat on my porch with her legal pad between us. "People think elder abuse looks like bruises," she said. "Sometimes it looks like signatures." "I know," I said, and wrote a check that would become a small committee that would become a line item in a state budget if we did our work right. Devin convinced me to hire a real financial advisor, a woman named Opal, who dressed like she vacationed in the desert and spoke in full paragraphs. "We're going to decontaminate," Opal said, opening a laptop and a window. "Ethically first, then structurally. That's how you keep sleeping at night." We moved money. We paid taxes with the relief of repentance. We funded a scholarship at Georgia State for midlife women studying whatever they wanted. Not everything had to be about crime to be holy. The AJC ran a Sunday feature, not about me, but about the pattern. How daughters and sons stopped seeing parents as people and started seeing them as ladders. They quoted me once, "Don't mistake gratitude for weakness." My phone lit up with strangers telling me their mothers, their fathers, their own names. Camille wrote me letters from a pretrial program. The first 2 were all shovels, digging excuses and burying evidence. The third was a seed. "I don't think I know how to be a person who doesn't take," she wrote. "I want to learn." I wrote back in pencil, the way my mother did when she wanted to remind me everything can be erased and rewritten. "Good," I wrote. "Start with silence, then listen." Mark did not write. Through Harold, I learned his strategy was concrete: deny, delay, dangle a counter-accusation. In photographs online, he still wore suits that fit. Some men never learn nakedness. One afternoon, I ran into Patricia at Whole Foods, of all the sanctuaries. She looked smaller, without a cause to carry. "June," she said, "how's your portfolio?" I picked up a cantaloupe and tested its weight. "Growing," I said, "but differently." She looked at the melon like it had betrayed her. "You could have kept it quiet." "I could have kept dying," I said, quietly. We both stared at the fruit. She wanted to fight. I wanted to go home. We did neither. We nodded. 2 women with futures we hadn't ordered, and moved on. At night I painted. The pears turned into hands. The bowl turned into a harbor. Sometimes a harbor is just a place that holds. Sometimes it teaches you how to leave. The courtroom smelled like lemon cleaner and stale ambition. I wore the navy suit I bought for Peter's retirement party and never got to see him wear a tie with. Harold squeezed my hand like a brother. Mariah nodded from a row reserved for people who know how to sit still while history updates. Camille's plea was quiet. The judge asked if she understood. She said yes with a voice that made me want to kneel and a voice that made me sit straighter all at once. Mark's plea came later. His lawyer did most of the talking, which was fitting. When it was my turn for the victim's statement, I stood at a lectern that had heard more confessions than any state church. "Your Honor," I began, and the words came not from my throat, but from every Tuesday I'd ever survived. People think theft is about money. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's about story. My daughter tried to write me as a minor character in a book I built. I object. I told the court about signatures and staircases, about motel rooms that smell like forgotten salt, about letters under pillows and pears that become hands. I did not cry. I let my voice do the work tears often ask for and sometimes prevent. After, in the hallway, Camille reached for me and I didn't move away. "Mom," she said, "I heard you." "Good," I said. "Keep listening when it's not me." A TV reporter asked if I felt vindicated. "No," I said. "I feel awake." At home, the floors gleamed. The contractor had finished while I was downtown, and the heart pines sang under my feet. I opened the windows and let the city in. Sirens, birds, some kid's bass pounding down the block, the long, complicated hymn of a place where people do terrible and beautiful things all morning and sleep anyway. A letter arrived from a woman in Decatur. "My son took my car," she wrote in wobbling script. "My grandson said I was done, but I got a bus pass and a library card. Thought you should know. I put her letter on my fridge with a magnet shaped like Georgia. I am not sentimental about magnets. Today, I was." That night, I didn't open Peter's voice note. I knew the last line by heart now. "Be your own witness. Say the truth out loud." I stood in the study that was mine and said, "I will." The house, my plain, beautiful, stubborn house, listened. 6 months later, summer draped itself over Atlanta like a wet towel you don't mind because it means you're alive. The scholarship fund chose its first 4 recipients: a home health aide studying urban planning, a grandmother learning data analytics, a baker who wanted to teach math, a woman who'd once signed a form she didn't read and promised never again. Opal came by with iced coffee and spreadsheets that told new stories about old money. "You're stable," she said, smiling, "and generous, which is the best kind of stable." Devin texted a photo from a beach I didn't recognize, her first vacation in 3 years. Mariah sent a postcard from Quantico that said only, "Stay loud." Harold adopted a dog named Biscuit, who ate half his mail and all his loneliness. I painted a self-portrait and didn't hate it. My mouth looked like mine. My eyes looked like my mother's the day she chose breath over smoke. In the background, I painted pears and a harbor and a strip of heart pine that glowed as if someone had remembered to turn the light on. Camille wrote from a program she'd requested, not because it made her sentence shorter, but because, for once, she wanted the lesson. "I am learning how to hold a feeling without making it someone else's job," she wrote. "I am learning how to be bored without buying anything." I wrote back, "Good. Learn how to say I was wrong without also saying but." One morning, I drove to Tybee alone. I sat with my feet in a shore that had forgiven worse than me. A girl ran past chasing a gull with a bucket. Her mother's voice carried on the wind. "Not so fast." I smiled. I had moved too carefully for too long. Not so fast had been my religion. Now, I was learning speed in new places, in saying no, in calling a thing what it is, in choosing light. On the way home, I stopped in Macon at a diner with a fan that clacked like it wanted attention. The waitress called me baby and meant it. I ordered pie. Pecan again, because some revolutions are circular. Back in Atlanta, the nonprofit used my porch for a meeting about legislation with a state rep who wore sneakers to make a point. We drafted language that would require banks to call a secondary contact when large transfers are requested by seniors. It was small and not small. I learned governance is mostly good people moving pebbles. That night, I opened the last file in Peter's insurance folder. It was a photo of us at Lake Lanier in '85, me in a swimsuit I would not wear now, Peter tan and cocky, Camille a watermelon with legs. On the back, he had written, in the Sharpie he used for screws, "You were always the point." I cried then, not for what we had been, but for what I had been afraid to be. I went outside, the porch light hummed, the city breathed. Somewhere in a house with a growth chart penciled on a doorframe, a mother read a letter from a future she wasn't sure she wanted and decided she did. Somewhere, a daughter apologized for the first time and meant it. Somewhere, a woman took off a necklace that felt like a recorder and put on another that felt like herself. In my living room, the heart pine held me up. The harbor walls caught the light. The pairs on canvas reached for one another like hands that finally understood their job. I made tea, I cut pie, I called a friend, I wrote a check, I answered a stranger's message with, "I believe you." I stood on my porch and listened to the city name itself again and again without asking for anyone's permission. I was my own witness. I said the truth out loud. I stayed.